attribution. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let them introduce themselves so that you understand the perspective they bring to the table, and then we'll start with the questions. The victim first.
The victim first, great. Richard Frankel, president of Rocket Fuel, co-founder. Rocket Fuel is essentially a demand-side platform kind of company that uses sophisticated artificial intelligence and modeling to figure out who are the perfect audiences to deliver for any advertiser's campaign. And we inhabit this whole real-time bidding world. We love real-time bidding. Enables our technology to be really smart. So very briefly, why am I a victim of attribution, and why am I up here on this panel? We spend a lot of time talking to clients about what value means in media. And the reason that we're so concerned with that is, of course, we wanted to list what value means, then we can optimize for it. So that's what we're focused on. And what we've found over the last few years is that almost any conversation about value turns into a conversation about attribution, because if you don't have the attribution right, then value is hard to understand. And often we find, and we'll be talking quite a bit about this today, that the distance between great attribution and what is actually done in the real world is quite large. And that makes things sometimes painful for us, because we are often stuck using non-ideal attribution methodologies. And so we don't really like being victims, and so we spend a lot of time educating the market about how to do things better. And I'll tell some stories later about why that matters.
Thanks. I'm Jeff Greenfield. I'm the co-founder and COO of C3 Metrics. I'm one of the 2 attribution companies here, and I sometimes feel like I'm from the future, and I'm here visiting all of you, helping to guide you in the right direction. Because in the future, as you saw on the graph earlier today that Ben put up, attribution was one of the only boxes that didn't get eaten and destroyed by all the big players, as analytics is going to be the big play. And for everyone in this room, attribution is going to be one of the biggest plays in your future. So I feel like I'm here to kind of lead you along the way. But I think the biggest thing that we'll talk about today is some of the frustration that a lot of folks feel, especially when they're a victim, that things aren't moving fast enough. But you know, it's all in the perception of things. I think that things are moving really freaking fast. I think they're moving along nicely, but for some of us, especially in the ad tech space, things aren't moving fast enough. But don't worry, because in the future, things will all work out okay.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm Steve Simpson. I'm a global EVP of Data and Analytics at Starcom MediaVest Group. If any of you guys know anything about Starcom MediaVest, we are one of the largest media planning and buying companies with a whole roster of blue chip clients, as you probably expect. My role in the organization is really to try to prove cause and effect relationships between how our clients invest their time and their energy and what they get in return. So as an employee of SMG, we create both platforms and experiences for our clients that are deeply rooted in human behavior. It's my job really to try to make those tangible for business results. So I would say I am the view of the client today, and my role is not to really guide you folks. I'd say my role is to guide our clients in investing their finite resources in the most effective way.
I'm Jeff Zwelling. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Convertra. This is the first time we've ever done a panel. Thanks, Joe. Because we didn't really want to go out there. But what we do is optimization. You guys call it attribution. We look at all of the media that our clients are buying on and offline. And then we make specific recommendations, algorithmic or empirical, upon how to better spend and allocate that money in the future as soon as 15 minutes or in quarters.
Thank you. Welcome, and thank you very much for joining us today. So I wanted to start by asking the final decision maker, the agent of the advertiser, in this case Steve, the one who represents the decision maker on which attribution techniques we're going to use in each campaign, to help us define, so that we all have the same understanding, what are we talking about when we talk about attribution? Because this is one of the terms that in some instances means is it last click, or some instances people are referring to attribution as mapping the entire purchase funnel and all of the touch points within the consumer. So from the advertiser perspective, could you tell us how you define that? Could you give us an example of a successful marketing program where you have seen that leveraged properly?
So we enter an interesting world now, as I think marketeers and CMOs specifically are starting to get their head around doing digital for whatever it means, right? And typically when we talk to CMOs, and I was just with the CMO of Coca-Cola probably 20 minutes ago before I ran down here, these guys see attribution as full 360 allocation of all of their efforts in what they call owned, earned, shared, and paid for media. So it's not just about thinking about paid for media. In fact, Coca-Cola deliberately put paid for media at the end, right? And increasingly we see that paid for media becomes the fuel of the ecosystem. So where historically we have been, I suppose, remunerated as an organization on how well we plan and buy paid for media, now we have to change somewhat. So at that level, and I'd say that's the broadest level of the term attribution that you see, that's the view that the client sees. Typically, though, there are different levels of attribution. So the next level down, or I suppose the interim level, is sort of cross-screen, right? And you're seeing a lot of work being done these days in how to match cookie behavior with set-top box data linked to store sales. And there are lots of organizations who are venturing into this territory. That's a level of attribution that we also have to have a vested interest in, because it's part of the ongoing roadmap that we want to take our clients to that end state, which is the full 360 view. I think attribution as we define it today in this room is all around digital attribution. And that's through a relatively narrow but important and complex lens. A lens, and maybe Jeff, you're closer to my world or to the CMO's world than many of the other people in the room. However, I would say that typically the misconception behind what we call attribution causes all sorts of issues, both with clients, with publishers and agencies themselves. And it's the connection points between those ways in which we approach attribution which are important. So in my world, I see a lot of successes around full 360 attribution models and resource allocation models, but they don't typically represent digital in the way that I feel that it needs to be represented. And the challenge I find actually is that in a previous role, I worked with a leading global financial institution. They were running a search-based mortgage campaign, and it was all pay-per-click. And at the same time, they were running both a TV campaign and a display ad campaign around the overall brand. And not surprisingly, there was the halo effect across that, which actually ensured that they ran out of money on the mortgage campaign by 11 a.m. And that's a big, big disaster. If you're a global organization, you're spending a lot of money. So we have actually seen many, many instances where we can both calibrate investments in a very strong way, and we did this for this mortgage company, which looked at the full spectrum of investments. For me, I think the way that we define attribution in this room, or the way that we typically talk about attribution, is more around that narrowly based focus. And through that narrow lens, there are many things that we've done very successfully. So just to round up, I think we're currently working with a hire car company. It's one of the big ones. You find that if you can map the click-through efficiency against the true ROI efficiency into quadrants, you find that there are many activities that you're undertaking where there's either value to be exploited, where the ROI efficiency is actually much stronger than the click-through efficiency, or in other situations where you're in a situation where your click-through efficiency or your pay-per-click does not represent true ROI. And what that allows us to do is either dial down our keywords or eliminate keywords, makes us move into organic search campaigns, or indeed, it may mean that we do a whole host of test and learn activities around sites. So as an agency, we find that this whole world of attribution is, to a certain extent, confused in terms of the client, and it's our role to really try to put a wrapper around that that allows them to get a handle on that and put their arms around it effectively. But also, we try to match both, I suppose, tactical decision-making with strategic. Does that help?
That helps, and judged by the strong reactions of both the leading attribution companies that you have at your right and at your left, I think that they would like to bring the different perspective into it, right? And how they look at how do we really start narrowing, and how do we provide value into this holy grail of attribution that eventually will be across all of the channels and in a consumer base, right? So if you guys.
So I think any attribution approach that doesn't focus on understanding the halo effect of all channels, in particular television, on digital, on display RTB, is basically not only trivial but useless. So the second thing I would say is that, from our perspective, and we service advertisers, not agencies. What we see is the agency is never in a position to have a full understanding of everything that the advertiser is doing, because increasingly the largest advertisers are splitting at least some portion of both their media buying or their investment in earned media across different people. And they're not really able to not only understand and sync all of those users, but also understand how all those spends interplay. As an example, by the way, is for a large automotive client of ours running a lot of TV, we recently saw a RTB buy that we saw in 1 month that had a very low attributed return on investment, very, very low. And when we delved into it, it turned out that almost $600,000 in that month of that display buy was in fact being sold outside of the U.S. This particular agency was directed to only buy U.S. for a U.S. campaign. When we brought it to the attention in Detroit that was $600,000, the agency said, oh yeah, we knew about that, we were going to optimize that. But then we threw up a slide and we showed that it had been going on for 7 months. So I think there is a conflict in many ways between people trying to do attribution in a silo with their own media that they're either buying or selling, and so it's important that it is, like you said, across all channels, but it also it needs to be completely holistic.
I would agree with that. I would agree that if you're going to do attribution, you're going to do it right. You got to look at everything, but just by a show of hands, and I mean that's the ultimate goal. You want to have this high strategic point of view and then the tactical view. Just from a show of hands, how many of you in this room manage the TV spend of a client's budget? Raise your hand. Are there any TV? There's a couple of TV folks here. All right. No one else manages TV spend. I don't know about you, but trying to get just the search and the display people to talk together sometimes is just impossible because they're at odds with each other. And if you think they're at odds with each other, the digital folks are really at odds with the TV folks. So I think, and this is part of the problem with attribution. I mean, everything that's been said so far is 100% correct. But the problem is that unlike anything else where you have 5 people and you say, hey, what is this? You get 5 different opinions. With attribution, you get from 5 people, 500 different versions of what it is. And the problem is that in terms of digital, and let's just talk digital, because in order to get more money to digital, we got to get our shit together. And right now, we don't have our shit together. We're not even on par with TV. And this is the whole issue with the 3MS initiative that we can go into a little bit later. But right now, digital advertising is a lie. It's completely a lie. This concept of last click, which is where 99% of all advertisers are at, is just, it's false. And we all know that it's wrong, but that's the entire basis of digital advertising today. So my goal with our clients is step one is to get them to make that big leap to go from last click to at least look at some of the other partners. Now, I would love to have all clients on this very sophisticated machine learning, super top secret, I can't even talk about it, algorithm, and match that up with all their TV spend and stuff like that. But that's a fairy tale. That's fantasy land. The reality is that if we can just get people off last click, even to do even attribution, and some people will look at that and say, even attribution, that's just horrible. That's just, why would you even do that? Well, because it's better than what you're doing right now. And I'll tell you how I found out about all this. It was 4 years ago. At our company, we have the famous minivan story. It's the minivan story because my co-founder, Mark, before we started C3 over 4 years ago, we were doing media buying. And about 6 weeks before he was taking his minivan trip out to Block Island, the client said, hey, you know, we need to cut spend. You know, where should we cut it at? So we ran an analysis. This is before attribution was even out. And we said, oh, well, the most expensive stuff are all these unbranded keywords. Let's cut them all. So we cut them all, you know, because that's what seemed like the client wanted to cut spend, so we cut spend. And the minivan story is 6 weeks later, Mark is in the minivan driving to Block Island, and he gets a call from the client saying, what the fuck is going on? Why are conversions down? What's going on? And so we had no idea because there was no attribution out at that point. Clear sailing had just started. So we started doing regression analysis, and we found out, oh my God. I mean, it made sense. We knew that the two were connected, but we couldn't ever connect them before. And that was the genesis for our company. So for us, attribution is just getting people to take that first step. It's like AA, you know. We actually, you know, you just admit that you have a problem, but the analogy we always use is it's like skiing. You know, the first day you go to ski, you're like, oh wow, look at those guys jumping those moguls on the double diamond slopes. I want to go up there. It's like, no. You have to snowplow on the bunny slope. So if we can just get you to snowplow, then eventually we'll make it up to the double diamonds. But the reality is for many of you, because I've seen the future, you'll get to there, but it's going to take a little while.
All right, so now that we've seen the future and that we know that a lot of us are still stuck in the last click attribution, and we need to go through the 3 A's program or 4, whatever, how many A's you have there. Can you tell us, it seems like a lot of this is about education and how do we get to the Holy Grail and being able to understand full funnel attribution from where we stand today, which is almost a world where the last click attribution still dominates. Can we talk a little bit about what you find within your portfolio of clients and with the advertisers you work with in terms of how do you go through that education process? Where do you start? What is the first step you take so that we can start walking in that direction and taking clients that way?
Well, maybe I'll jump in here because we are often working with clients to get them to take that next step. And while I agree that eventually more holistic approaches are fantastic, what we're finding is that that takes a lot of effort, investment, and organizational challenges, and it's hard to get there. So, and the beautiful thing about digital, and the reason that we all like this business, or one of the reasons and that's so exciting about it, is that there is so much data available about what's going on with your campaigns that it's not as hard to understand what the meaning of the activity is. So, and all that data can make solving some of these problems a little bit easier. So, the first step that we often advise our clients is really simple, which is just understand what is the value of view. That's our recommendation of first step. There's a debate. Clients sometimes want to debate with us: does view through have any value, and what should it be? Well, what we say is, let's just measure it, and that's a really easy first step towards starting to understand why attribution matters. We had a client who, a major computer manufacturer, who only gave credit for clicks, and so on our own dime, we ran a bunch of media for them that was optimized for view and a very simple model of view and click. And what we saw was that when our model optimized to both view and click, they got 50% more sales in their store, compared to when we only used click. And so we took that data to them and showed it to them, and and that was very exciting for the marketing manager that we worked with. They were really thrilled by that because literally for the same budget, with a different understanding of how interaction led to response, they got more sales. And that was a beautiful and simple thing. There is kind of a sad end to this story, which is that his boss didn't believe it and actually decided not to implement the view and click model, even though their data showed very clearly, not our data, their data showed very clearly that they got 50% more sales in their online store when they had the new model. But since their boss didn't believe it, they didn't implement it. So,
what do you mean the boss didn't believe it? Like data is data, right? Is 1 or 0?
Yes, but people don't often, not everyone thinks that way. And so, the task for that marketing manager was to build more research and to take more time and to invest more in understanding what was going on. But what we're seeing is that with a lot of our customers, when we take that first step of let's actually just measure with the test and control, the world's simplest kind of program, let's measure the impact of view and see what that does. That's a great first step because it gets people thinking it gets them crawling outside of that last click box and looking around, and what they see is that they can actually make more money if they just have a slightly different view of the world. And then there's many more steps you can take from there. You can ultimately get to a wide model of things. But the nice thing about digital is that you can measure, that kind of program to measure the lift in view through is very modest cost over a very short period of time with answers very quickly. And so that makes it attractive as a good first step.
Marty, you said something interesting about data is data. Unfortunately, though, for folks that are not data-centric, which are the majority of advertisers out there, data is data if it agrees with what I believe is the truth. If it does not go along with what I believe is the truth, then the data must be wrong. And so what we've found is that we've had a lot of agencies that have wanted to start doing attribution to prove out what their programs are that they're selling to their advertisers. And when it doesn't work, they get very pissed off and very upset. And so, it's almost like you have to take like your attribution drugs because you have to look at things differently. I remember years ago, my background is in healthcare, and I remember when I was taking my first x-ray class, learning how to read x-rays. I had a lot of problems. I flunked the first class because you're looking at a one-dimensional picture of a three-dimensional object. And that's kind of how the difference between last click and attribution is. With last click, you're looking at things in completely one dimension. And all of a sudden, you're going to have to look at things in a full 360 view from a completely different perspective. And so what occurs is it changes a lot of things. One of the most common things that happens is that now all of a sudden, you're looking at things on a much further timeline. So many customers will come to us and say, my average days to conversion is 3 days. And we tell them right up front, before we even put tags up, well, that's going to change. No, it's been that way for like 3 years. No, it'll change. And after about the first 60 days, that number starts ticking up, and it goes up, and it goes up. And after 6 or 7 months, when a client who originally thought their average days to purchase is 3 days, but it now turns out it's 29 days, that changes everything. Well, now they can't. They're creative. They shouldn't be changing creative every week or every couple of days. It changes their entire model, their entire mode of thinking. And all the stakeholders also have to change as well. So it's a difficult first step.
I think it's I think it's almost patronizing to say that clients will only look at data when it helps them prove what they believe is the universal truth in their organization.
I think you said sellers of media and agencies.
No, you said clients as well, right?
Well, when I said clients, I meant agency clients, not advertisers.
Okay.
But I'd also say that some advertisers within an organization, there's a lot of stakeholders, a lot of people have a lot of money at stake in terms of what their belief system is. And there's a tendency where they're like, they want to run and look at attribution, they want to look at the full 360, but they don't want to share it with everyone within their organization yet. They don't want the ad networks to know about it yet. They want to see it first, because they want to make certain that they have an agreement that it agrees with what they told everyone is the truth. And if not, they sometimes want to try to change the truth. I'm just telling you where things are at right now. Don't worry, it'll change. But that's where things are right now for a lot of folks.
I would say that they want to try to create a competitive advantage wherever that competitive advantage can manifest itself. And insight and speed to insight is everything. So the opportunity to cut out underperforming initiatives, negotiate around certain placements and creatives that aren't performing from an ROI perspective but appear to be performing from a click perspective is, to a certain extent, their own IP that they would like to leverage against the market. And it would be incredibly naive of them to go out and use this in an open market, because to a certain extent, they are still looking to try to maximize the bang for the buck. And we understand that more bucks are going into digital. And I would say that most of the big brand advertisers today are doing the most interesting stuff in this area. So I think that we have corporate America and the brands that exist within it now have more of a risk-taking culture when it comes to digital, but they also work within the idea that they want to create the right metrics and measurement frameworks in order to show that what they're doing is the right thing, not to maintain any status quo. I think they're beyond status quo right now.
Steve, I want to ask you a question about what big brands are doing, because I think there's almost like a bipartite system of marketing. A brand like Coca-Cola, I mean, it's a top 3 brand in the world, top 1 brand, depending on how you measure these things. Massive company, a huge brand, and they're prepared and able to make tremendous investments in research across all kinds of media and really take a top-down view, and a company like that can do that. And Fortune 50 branders, Fortune 100 branders, I don't know, really big companies, they can afford to make these huge investments. And I think the kind of top-down view that you're talking about is not just possible but common, and I believe you that they're taking risks and experimenting and trying to do these things. But when you get to the next tier down of marketers, many of whom are still Starcom customers, or Starcom clients, and are perfectly, are established brands with large companies, public companies, but they're not Coca-Cola scale, right? And so they have much harder choices to make about resource allocation, and they may not have the budgets to invest in mass scale, cross all media research. And so, what I want to propose, or at least I guess this is my question for you, Steve, what you think, and I'm curious what Jeff's view on it is too. Those are the people that I'm advising. When I'm saying you should try to figure out what your view attribution is, I'm not doing that for a Coca-Cola level company. I'm doing it for, it's Fortune 101 through 1,000. It's these mid-sized guys who are a little more budget constrained, and they're the ones who, it seems to me, are a better candidate for, like, let's take the next step, because they can't go all the way to nirvana with their budgets right now. And that maybe is the world that we really need to work in attribution. I don't know, I'm curious what you guys think about that.
I absolutely agree. You said that you thought the brands were the innovators and the risk takers. From our perspective, the most sophisticated users of data and that act on it by far are the direct response guys. The beach bodies and the dating sites, because they basically have a philosophy that they have unlimited supply of their product. They don't have any cost of distribution for all intents and purposes. And so if they can spend $1 and get another $10 back, they're going to do it all day. And so they're so hungry for information of where to deploy those dollars. And as long as they're getting the return on that investment, that's what they want to do. I wanted to go back to something that you said about display, because I think it has a lot of context for this conference and RTBs. One of the things that we found, besides running controls and tests of view-through, and we've been able to make view-through display work for direct response advertisers on their regular CPA. And here's what turns out to be the secret sauce. It has to be the first thing that person ever had with that brand. So for instance, if the person's been to an eHarmony and then subsequently gets hit with a display ad, and this is based on both controls as well as regressions and something called counterfactuals. But what we see is if the person's been to eHarmony a couple days before and then they get hit with a display ad off of the irrelevant inventory on a RTB, if they actually then proceed to go to the site, even if it takes them another 30 days until they convert, we found it to be highly correlative that display was what caused them to go there. And so what we think is most important is making sure we understand what the visitor is doing and what order they're doing it. Because understanding which thing happened first is critical. And that obviously is not going to work with Coca-Cola because my child at 3 has been inundated at this point. But for the Fortune 100 to 1,000 or internet retailer 100, a lot of the brands that the spend is actually introducing and making people aware. So that's just something I wanted to get back on the RTB thing.
So let's talk a bit about, so what are the additional benefits? So now we have a very clear view on attribution, the opportunity there, the challenges, where do we first start, and what impact does it have in the way in which we run marketing programs, and what changes does it force, right? Now, what happens when we put RTB and when we now have the capability to actually execute on real time on the data that comes from those attribution models? What happens then, and what does it help accelerate?
Rain Man. I always give the example of the movie Rain Man. Do you guys remember that movie, the concept of card counting? Everyone knows about card counting and how there's like plus or minus points for card counting. So the connection of attribution with RTB is like sitting at the blackjack table with Rain Man. Because essentially what's happening now is you're looking at all of the events in real time that's going on with attribution, and the attribution provider sitting in the middle is able to see each individual user and counting plus or minus points, just like what Jeff said, based on the first action they did. Now they've done a branded search. Now they're brand aware. Now they're interacting more with the brand. They've come back. Now they've interacted with social. But now 5 days has gone by versus where the mean is maybe 2 days, so we need to subtract a couple of points. The idea is keeping a point count on every individual based on all of their activities so that when they reach a certain point in the funnel where they're about ready to pop, you then signal to RTB providers in real time via pixel fire, because that's the most simple method, eventually some sort of more direct connection, and say, hey guys, this individual is at this point. When they leave this site and they go to the New York Times or the Huffington Post, show them a huge freaking ad so they convert sooner rather than later. That's really the promise of combining attribution with RTB, is to be kind of the machine in the middle that lets all of the players know where an individual is at within their individual funnel. We're not quite there yet, because in order for that to occur, you've got to have RTB systems that can handle not just a conversion pixel, not just the start of a funnel, not just the middle of the funnel, but maybe 20 other points in between, and it all has to be synced up with certain types of creative and everything. But the future's very close.
Well, I think we're actually already there. But, Marta was waiting for me to say that.
I said close.
Well, yesterday.
Yeah.
I mean, we're already there. Certainly at my company, we're already there, and that's what we've built is a platform that enables marketers to see all the points in the funnel and understand the interactions and show the ad to the person at the right time to cause the effect they want, whether it's brand awareness or an improvement in consideration or a sale or whatever. And the challenge for the marketplace, I think one of the biggest challenges for attribution, or for understanding the value of interaction with customers, because that's really what attribution's about, is to take it beyond the direct response to how do we understand how to build awareness and to turn those interactions that used to be, we ran TV ads and we got some Nielsen reports a month later, and then we did some analysis at the end of the year, to turn that into something that happens in real time, so that we can understand how we can actually drive awareness, how we can drive consideration, intent, the whole funnel. And I think that is possible now in digital with the interactions available in RTB and the kind of data that we have available. But I think that the understanding of how marketers can take advantage of that, that's got to catch up, and we have to educate the marketplace. And I think once we do that, then folks will look to companies like yours, Jeff, to plug in your models so they can manage that whole process and not just have it be about that final come to my site and buy.
I'd say there's also a fair degree of skepticism around the quality of the inventory that they can buy, right? And until we get to that, and in a world where this attribution thing seems very hard, DSPs seem like a black box. All the inventory is shit, right? And how much better would it have got if I had just ran a whole bunch of display ads? Sometimes people just walk away from that because it just feels too complex and too much like hard work. And I imagine that we are close to the future, but my sense is that we need to give the stakeholders and who are brand owners a lot more confidence that they will continue to be able to hopefully manage the conversation between their brands and their customers.
Okay, here, transparency, education, let's make it easy, all things I love, and I push very, very strong at all of the places I've ever worked in where I've led, technology development or agency development, right? So let's, before we close, talk about one more thing. If there was one thing that you could change among all of the different players that have to interact to make to work on the attribution funnel, and that is the agencies, the advertisers, the media providers, and the technology companies, which are the ones that should expose all of that transparency. And I think every time we see more and more of that. So no more black boxes, Steve, not from the side of the world that I come from. Which one would you change? What would you like to see change so that we can accelerate the growth of these capabilities and bring value to the market in the next 6 months?
We've had a lot of problems pulling people out of segments on the fly. So, we want to be able to say, this person converted, stop hitting them. So that's really important. Call it a frequency cap, but we want frequency caps that are instantaneous and across all networks, not only RTBs.
I think sitting on the client's dollars to a certain extent, I think it's quite safe to say now with the changing landscape that we can't build everything as an organization. So I would look for a whole heap more of collaboration between the folks on the stage and working with organizations such as ours to go back to clients and networks to try to make this a more palatable way of working as it is today. For sure, that's something that I think our organization would be very open to because we are very much into the buy and build world too, right?
I think for me and for our company, the biggest thing we'd like to change is the fear. I think that everyone this year is saying that we're going to do attribution this year because everyone else is talking about it, but because of so much confusion out there, I think there's still a lot of fear in the marketplace of taking that first step. So for us, it would be to kind of maybe take everybody in a room and put them under hypnosis and get them over that fear, possibly.
The future here now.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Well, I'm going to do a real practical thing. If I could change one thing in the market now, the one thing that I think is really mangling both understanding of value of digital as well as any kind of attribution efforts is ridiculous over retargeting that is really destructive. And if I could make that go away, I would be really, really happy because I think the waters of understanding are really muddied when you have 5 or 10 different companies all showing ads to consumers hundreds of times a day to try to capture that last click or last view. And that is a big mess that I'll be really happy when we're past.
I was trying to say basically a similar idea, but being able to pull people.
Excellent. So I wanted to open up for questions from the floor if you guys wanted to ask more, know more about how these guys are looking at the attribution side.
Hi, it's my second mobile question of the day. It's Howie Schwartz from Human Demand. So how does this all work on mobile when we're not dealing with any cookies?
So we were able to create user IDs in the machines that they interact and are associated with through multi-billions of transactions of people logging in through multiple devices to services where there's a common login event. And so that's the first thing. And so
Can you explain that in English?
we know what your PC is and we know what your phone is. And so when you
If there's a common login.
if there's a common login. But we've been doing this for a while, and we're in 45% of U.S. target.
So what happens if there's no common login?
Then you don't know.
I would just add to that that I think that a lot of things are going to get better and improve over time. I think the big concern now that a lot of providers have is some of the privacy concerns and the issues surrounding litigation and stuff. We always get clients that say, can you match, someone's PC to their phone, and, and we talked a little bit about this earlier in terms of all of the data that you can collect. You can get overwhelmed with all the data. In order to do attribution and to start and take that first step, you don't have to look at every single thing, and you don't have to look at all of the stuff. Just do something different. And I think the same is true in terms of technology from advertising's sake. You look at all this cool technology and you're like, as a marketer, it's like, I want to take advantage of all of it. I want to do it all. But the problem is that, it's more important to protect the brand than it is to promote the brand. And so you also have to put on sometimes your legal hat and say, well, this is really cool technology, but can it get us in trouble? And sometimes, depending on the size of your brand, you can't take that risk, and that's unfortunate. But I think we'll see some changes soon. There's a new Supreme Court case that should be, hopefully, it was just heard in November, we're waiting for the decision to come down any day, that will change a lot of these privacy concerns and allow us to kind of move forward in a direction that will help everyone.
Just one quick point on mobile to address that real specifically. What we're looking at is are ways that allow us to understand how to target and optimize in the mobile space that don't rely on logins or cookies. And there are actually quite a few methods that look promising. And so I think there will be multiple ways to skin that cat. And there's so much activity on mobile that there's so much data being generated from people interacting with their devices that I think there will be some solutions that will be reasonable, that won't run into privacy problems. I could explain more, but I'm running out of time.
Michael Koshansky, Havas Digital. So we heard a lot about display, but a lot of my clients are asking about what is the impact of display on search, and they don't want to move away from search budgets. So how do you solve for that problem?
It's pretty easy because you can create a bunch of controls, and then you can measure the impact when that user was displayed something and what he did on search. And when he did get displayed, and you can calculate that.
Yeah, and after you do a search, you go somewhere.
Yeah.
And so when you land there, that's another event that you can track. So I think search is, if you want to put the effort into analyzing the interaction of search and display, or search and digital video, or search mobile is a little harder. It's possible if you make the effort to do it.
I'll just add in that attribution is not about robbing Peter to pay Paul. Nobody loses with attribution. Search people always get freaked out. You're going to rob my freaking budget. It's going to go to display, or that's not what happens. Everybody rises. It's just a matter of reallocating. In the case of search, you end up spending more money on the upper funnel keywords, which actually drives more people down the funnel, so you end up spending more budget on branded keyword search. And so everything all interacts together. And so everything works well together. Everybody wins when things are properly attributed, and then you don't end up with any attribution victims.
Thank you, and I think with that note of it's not about robbing Peter to give it to Paul, thank you very much.
Thank you.